Sham fell to the elastic ring floor at the very last moment. The gleaming meter-long blade rustled above his head, slashing the tight air. One didn't need an extra brain to guess what could happen next. Sham rolled forward toward his opponent. Two limbs, topped with something like puffy steel dumbbells, thudded to the floor where he had just been lying. But Sham was already almost under the belly of the combat robot, in the dead zone. Of course, the robot was far too advanced a machine to have an actual dead zone. Against a fully functional praying mantis, as these battle robots were known among the resistance fighters, Sham wouldn't stand a chance. But this one was demilitarized, adapted for prize fights. The Puritans didn't like it when a spectacle ended too quickly, even if, this time, it was not sporting entertainment, but a pointedly sadistic execution. The robot froze for a moment. Obviously, its slightly stupefied tactical processor was digesting the new situation. An almost identical episode flashed in Sham's mind. The dimly gleaming belly of the mantis, the low-vision sensors barely visible through the dusty helmet shield, and himself, in his battlesuit, lying on the brown Martian soil, 15 feet from his left leg. Sham knew then that even though the suit's electronics had already treated the stump and pumped him full of painkillers and anti-shock medication, he had no more than a few seconds before he would lose consciousness and be torn to pieces by the mantis. Back then, he was saved by the power sword, a last resort weapon that, he knew this for a fact, was laughed at behind his back by almost all of his brothers in arms. No one believed it was possible to get within melee range of the mantis. The bluish-gray shimmering blade cut through the robot's armor like thin paper, exactly where Sham knew the small lump of gray flesh was. The brain of a 5-month-old embryo, grown in a biotank and implanted in the killing machine. A tactical processor, the pinnacle of Puritan military thought. Today, Sham had only his arms and legs protected by hardened Kevlar plates. Sham had no illusions about this protection, however. He knew the mantis's cleavers would cut through the Kevlar almost as easily as through muscle and bone. The robot shuddered, swaying slightly from side to side. A light rustle of muffled voices ran through the audience, most likely an emergency wave of instant bets on how man and robot would get out of the new situation. Puritans loved the sweepstakes. This praying mantis had its lower vision sensors removed, obviously one of the demilitarization procedures. But that meant nothing. It would be enough for the robot to crank one of the upper combat arms downward. Sham didn't have time to finish the thought. A titanium claw swiftly swept toward him from the robot's stern, glinting with glass beads of sensors. At the very last moment, Sham managed to tuck his leg away, the same leg that had been grown in a clone tank and grafted on to replace the one lost in a skirmish on Mars. The medics had done a good job, and his reflexes worked no worse than when it was the leg Sham had been used to since birth. The Puritan cyber prosthetics were much faster, but the thought of flesh fusing with metal and plastic made Sham shudder. Apparently, the tactical processor had finally realized that he could not pull out the man hiding under its belly so easily. The robot suddenly sank low on its support legs. Sham jerked to prevent the robot from pressing his weight into the ring, but instead, the robot straightened all his limbs and jumped into the air. The stands roared, cheering the spectacular move, but Sham instantly realized that Mantis had made a mistake. Perhaps its tactical processor, which had never been allowed to truly develop into a full-fledged brain, couldn't grasp the full extent of the changes made to the machine during demilitarization. The fully functional models had special little propulsors that allowed them to increase the length and height of their jumps and even adjust the trajectory, but now those add-ons were gone. Sham's opponent, jumping into the air, deprived himself of one of his advantages, maneuverability. In addition, Sham, A real, intelligent being was able to make unexpected tactical decisions almost instantly, if only based on intuition alone. Instead of bouncing aside to the far corner of the ring, where the mantis's manipulators couldn't reach him, he jumped toward the machine. Dodging one of the dumbbells, he delivered a powerful blow with the edge of his palm precisely at the joint of the left limb with the cleaver. The robot swung the ghastly blades, but it went wide and high. Man and machine collapsed onto the ring floor, tangled together. However, Sham managed to push off so that the metal hulk wouldn't crush or catch him with an accidental swing of the cleaver. It was still too soon. During this risky move, Sham had time to cast a glance toward the VIP suite on the prestigious Eastern Stand, the one he had been checking on from time to time since the start of the fight. The Lord Protector of Purity was not there yet. The robot squirmed in the corner of the ring, rising to its feet. Sham grasped a broken-off arm with a long, curved blade. Of course, it was not a monomolecular edge like the combat models had, but it was still better than bare fists. When the robot moved, Sham immediately stepped in the opposite direction so as not to lose his defensive position, and gasped from the piercing pain in his chest. Damn! He hadn't even noticed when the mantis got him. There was no blood, but any movement, even deep breaths, caused terrible pain. Looks like a broken rib, maybe more than one. No good. It wasn't fatal as it is, but the injury would limit his movement. In a fight against a mantis, even a demilitarized one, mobility was the key to survival. Sham gritted his teeth in despair. He must keep fighting. He can't give up until... Apparently, the tactical processor figured out something because the robot, slightly askew, the awkward landing took its toll on the machine too, did not waste time on maneuvers and headed straight for Sham. Sham held his trophy in front of him. If the mantis didn't go for a full-on charge, he had to try to parry the attacks of the second blade. Of course, taking hits from the dumbbells wasn't appealing either, but at least they wouldn't cut him to pieces right away. The hall fell completely silent. The Puritans froze in anticipation of the end of the fight. It was so quiet that it seemed to Sham as if the pulsing ringing in his ears traveled throughout the vast room. What is it waiting for? Sham thought, looking at the mantis that had suddenly frozen a few steps away. Why doesn't it attack? A heavy hand suddenly patted his shoulder, and Sham barely held himself from swinging the cleaver back at the new threat. "Easy, kid," a familiar voice said. "You'll have your chance to swing that toothpick later. That was one hell of a nifty move, by the way. Sit down, take a breath." The ringing in his ears suddenly subsided, and Sham sank down on a stool placed by his coach. The round was over. The coach, a big scarred Puritan named Tovold, shook his head worriedly. "It's no good, kiddo. You're going down with this kind of trouble. Sure thing, you're a tough fighter. I haven't seen anybody like you in a long time. Nobody's lasted longer than the fourth round in the last few years. But you're not gonna make it with this." Tovold pointed at Sham's chest. "I can request to postpone the bout. The promoting committee won't be happy, but they won't go against the public's opinion. The people want to see a fair fight to the end. People won't be satisfied to see a great fighter slaughtered like a chicken. There's a minor festival in a month. We can schedule a rematch for that date. You'll have just enough time to recover." Sham shook his head. "No, I want to exercise my one-time right." The coach sighed. "Boy, you've lasted 5 rounds. You're good. You're one of the best. You've got a chance of being the first to last all 10, and people smell it. They're already on to you. You hear that?" Tovold waved at the packed hall of the great festival arena, still unexpectedly silent. "They need you alive. Well, they won't let you go free, of course, but you can survive. Sham closed his eyes. How much more time did he have? At the Grand Festival, the breaks between rounds were longer than usual, but he couldn't bicker with this old Puritan forever, even though Tovold was almost a decent guy. For a Puritan, of course, every fighter was entitled to one injection during the course of the bout. A cocktail of stimulants, mentabust, anesthetic, a lethal injection. The last option was used most often. Many preferred a painless, instant death instead of being turned into a piece of meat by a combat robot, though one had to last at least 2 rounds for that. Sham lasted 5. Can you mix it so that the reaction slowdown is minimized? Sham asked. Stimulants and mentabust at a minimum. I only need to subdue the pain. He couldn't risk a large dose of local stimulants. His biochemistry, the product of long and complex genetic selection and many modifications, was too different from the Puritans. Tovold's eyes widened. So, you're not going for a black one? He exhaled sharply. Apparently, he thought that Sham had given up and was asking for a black shot. Damn, boy, all the more. Why go all in now? Give yourself a chance for the future. The shot gonna keep you alive for a round or 2, but what then? Sooner or later, a broken rib will pierce your lung and… Can you mix it? Tovold shook his head and opened the med box. This decision was always up to the fighter, and there was no time to argue. The break was coming to an end. Sham didn't waste time on thanks either. He was too busy breathing carefully, trying not to disturb his broken ribs. He had to regain his strength as much as possible, because behind the power fence of the ring, he noticed something he'd been waiting for. A few tall men with typical professional and cautious expressions appeared in the VIP box. The Lord Protector's guards. Now, all Sham had to do was hold out until the right moment. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We won't get another one. If we fail, the Puritans won't give us a second chance. Or maybe there will be no one left to try again. 6 months ago, Sham sat across from the commander of the resistance force listening. That's why we need someone who will endure everything, who will go through to the end and not break down at the very last moment. You've volunteered for suicide missions 3 times already, and you've always come back, after successfully completing them. But I have absolutely no right to order you because this time… Yes. Sham realized he was interrupting the highest officer in the resistance, but the word came out of his mouth without will. I agree. He looked the commander straight in the eye. We're losing the war, or rather, we already lost. The Puritans have already pushed us out of the solar system to the outer colonies, and we won't last long there either. They outnumber us in almost everything hundreds of times. Population, industry, resources. We're doomed, the commander said. I don't believe in miracles. After the High Council rejected the Radicals' proposal by a majority vote, we had nothing left. It was unacceptable, Sham said, although no one asked for his opinion. But the commander just nodded. Absolutely. In fact, I don't think the Radicals themselves were honestly going for it. The survival of humanity at the cost of mass murdering 90% of its population. That's the Puritan method, although I don't think even they would do such a thing. The results of the High Council vote were deliberately kept private so as not to humiliate those who voted in favor out of desperation. But you'll be interested. I can tell you that the High Command and the entire leadership of the Genetic Academy voted unanimously against it. We are military and scientists, not terrorists. Sham suspected in his heart that all the talk about turning to biological warfare was just a way to test public opinion, and no one was seriously going to develop a virus aimed solely at Puritans. However, he still felt a pang of relief. But the Academy came up with a different plan, the commander said. Some joker called it the Parthian Arrow. A rather dark joke if you ask me, but the name stuck. All intelligence reports indicate that the Puritans will launch an offensive in all directions in the next few months. They'll throw all the forces they've been saving up for the last 20 years. Do you realize what that means? Sham was silent for a while, then nodded. What do you want me to do? He said. The commander smiled grimly. You will have to last at least until round 6, he said, and then you'll go down. It is astonishing what the human brain is capable of in moments of utmost physical and mental strain. It was as if Sham's consciousness had split in two. One half was engaged in a macabre dance with death, embodied in the creation of human hands, a jointed machine built for one purpose only: to kill people. Sham's body performed impossible pirouettes, lunges, jumps, and rolls, holding on a hair's breadth from the inevitable. Time seemed to slow down, allowing him to react to the inhuman speed of the robot. And yet, it was as if Sham was rewatching an old movie about the part of his life that had finally brought him here, to the main ring of the Puritan Empire's capital city. He knew he had nowhere to go back to anyway. 2 months ago, as he had already begun his journey up the gladiatorial ladder from the concentration camp on Mercury, the last planet of the Resistance had fallen. The Puritan offensive had ended in a final victory. There were probably still small enclaves left here and there, separate bases on undeveloped planets and stations in empty, useless star systems. But they were all doomed, either to be taken over by the Puritans in the near future, or to slowly fade away from the rest of humanity. By refusing the option of total annihilation, the Resistance had doomed itself. But it still had one last trump card left in this terrible game. Sham. If only he could make it. If he could hold out. He was beginning to tire. Plus, the effects of the injection would soon wear off, and then he would find it hard to breathe. So far, he'd managed to hold off the robot's onslaught. The severed limb certainly helped, as Sham wielded it like a medieval mercenary with a halberd. But he couldn't help but glance, way too often, at the VIP box. The Lord Protector of Purity always came, if he came, to the final duel of the grand festival toward the middle. By unwritten tradition, it was believed that only humanity's strongest and most persistent enemies were worthy of his attention. If the duel ended early, it was considered a good sign. Enemies are weak, humanity is strong. The Puritans did not see the irony in the fact that the defender of mankind was a machine controlled by the mangled brain of an unborn child. The irony wasn't their thing at all. Parrying another attack of the mantis, Sham noticed from the corner of his eye how a wave of excitement ran through the audience. For the first time since the fight began, heads were turned away from the ring. Everyone was looking at the same point. At the Lord Protector, who had appeared in the VIP box. I wonder, Sham quickly thought, if my opponent was a human, some stern Puritan fighter like Tovold, would he also turn to the leader of mankind, depict with the fingers of his left hand the symbol of the double spiral, a sign of purity of the human race? That might have played in Sham's favor, if he planned to win. But the robot's cold relentlessness was much better suited for his plans. Sham parried another attack from one of the robot's clubs and rolled closer to the death machine. The sudden movement made his chest throb sharply. Counting in the huge dose of painkillers, it was very likely that he had finally punctured his lung with a rib fragment. But it didn't matter now. The second dumbbell was already flying at his head. He deflected it, but the force of the blow knocked the trophy limb out of his hands, and it rolled away to the far corner of the ring. Sham took one last look at the Lord Protector and jumped up with a desperate gesture of his left arm to cover himself from the swiftly advancing cleaver. The high-alloy steel blade changed its trajectory only slightly, cutting through the Kevlar plate so that it didn't immediately decapitate Sham, but only severed his arm just above the wrist. He staggered backward, swinging his stump awkwardly. The gushing blood stained Sham, the ring beneath his feet, even the robot. The crowd roared and flashed, capturing the moment of triumph, the moment when the last enemy of humanity would be defeated. In the last seconds of his life, Sham did not see, nor could he, behind all this chaos, as a small cloud flew out of the stump of bone and instantly headed towards the Lord Protector of Purity, quickly dissipating so that it could not be seen. The pinnacle of resistant science. Chromosome-sized nanobots, something on the edge of living and non-living matter, almost like viruses, but with a far more complex, subtle, and long-lasting program than simple viral duplication. Tuned to a man whose DNA was the sacred idol of an entire Puritan civilization. The Lord Protector had about 10 million direct descendants, since getting his genome as a source for one of the children in a family was the cherished dream of every Puritan. Their genomes were almost identical to the genome of the Protector of Purity, and the percentage of human copies of the standard grew almost exponentially. To prevent genetic drift, the DNA of all embryos was compared to the reference. Those whose differences were too great were removed and turned into bioprocessors. Humanity was well on its way to becoming a box of tin soldiers. But now, that would change. The nanobots were customized with the Lord Protector's DNA. Breeding in the body of the primary host, they would embed themselves in every DNA similar to the reference, and when that happened, the next program would start. Randomizer. It's impossible to compare something to a benchmark if the benchmark itself is constantly changing in unpredictable ways. But Sham will never see all of this. The metallic gleam of the robot obscured the ring, the lights under the far ceiling of the arena, and the entire universe.